Okay, this is the next little tutorial, and this one talks about what is called the Census of Government. We already went through the ACS and the Census Reporter. This is the third step, and you use this in conjunction with the others to help your part of your little project for this week. So, Census of Government it is just what it sounds like, and it's a census of the government in the plural in the United States. So how do you get there? So on the census main page, you're going to go to topics. And you see all these 12 topics here, and I want you to go to public sector. Makes sense. So here's all the public sector things. So as it turns out, most of these things are part of the Census of Government. So you can see there it says Census of Government, congressional and intergovernmental. And there's all kinds of topics. So before I go to this one, Census of Governments, let me talk about some of the others that are interesting. So voting and registration is an interesting topic. So let me click on that. And you're going to get this page here. And you can see some of these reports, selected characteristics of the citizen, 18 and older, voting and registration in the election of November 2014. So remember, this is the 2012, this is the latest report, but soon there will be 2016, I assume, that'll be popping up. So let's go to electorate profiles, which is interesting. So here you're going to see reports on profiles of the United States and the states. So let's click on the United States. We're going to get this Excel spreadsheet that comes up. There it is. Okay. So here it talks about, from the 2015 American Community Survey, it talks about the total number of citizens and then the voting age population, right? And then it starts profiling them demographically, and you can see that there, right? So that's interesting. So that's just the United States. But we could also compare that to another unit. So say we want to compare it to Nebraska. Here is Nebraska from the 2015 American Community Survey. So here's the population of Nebraska. And then it talks about the age demographics, the gender demographics, the race demographics, the origin demographics. And so you can see where this kind of information, again, is useful for comparative purposes. Okay, so let's go back now to the Census of Government. I can get there by clicking backwards. Hopefully I can. And it took me right back to the Census main page. So again, I'm just going to go to public sector. And then there's these other categories as well. One that we might be interested in is government taxes, but that's also on the main Census of Government, as well as government finances. So let's go to government finances real quick. This is interesting because this is in a little bit more detail. So let's talk about public school system finances, just as an example. Okay, so you're going to get this, and again, this is the 2012, I think, Census of Government, or this is 2014 data, sorry. And so again, there's the survey tables, and then there's the state level tables. So let's look at the survey, or let's look at the state level tables by clicking on the Excel chart. Okay, so here we have some summary tables. So let's look at this. Summary of public and elementary school system finances by state. Okay, so this is interesting because it starts talking about how school districts are financed. And this is just as kind of the broad picture, right? So elementary and secondary revenue from federal sources, from state sources, and from local sources, right? So just generally across the United States, we talk about uh, who pays for school, right? So again, these are you add 3 zeros to the end of all of these numbers. But so here's the total funding across the United States for elementary and secondary schools. $617 billion. 52, almost 53 billion comes from federal sources, but then 200 and almost 290 billion from state sources, and almost that much from local sources. So this is where education funding actually gets kind of interesting if you're looking into that kind of thing, because here you can start comparing state sources with local sources, and what you'll find is that the split is kind of even in a lot of places, but then in some states, there's a heck of a lot more money from local sources than state sources, and vice versa. Um, so for example, Florida, it's about even, more from local sources. Look at Illinois, uh, a lot more from local sources, quite a bit more from local sources than state sources. Look at Indiana, a lot more from state sources than local sources. And of course, remember we talked about Hawaii. There is taxes from local sources, but most of it's from the state because it is one unified state school district. So this actually is kind of an interesting chart for people looking at school districts, school funding, I should say. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to get back to the census of governments in general. We can do that. Um, and it's right there, but I want to show you how you get there from the census of governments. And again, I think this is going to take me back to the main census page. Let's go to the public sector, and let's go directly to census of governments. And so the census of governments is a compilation and a census done every 5 years. So you can see over here, 1992, 1997, 2002, 2007, 2012, the latest data, and then there will be a 2017. This is an interesting report, the one on structure of governments. This is a summary report. This one is individual state descriptions. Now, this is a PDF document. I won't go into it in this presentation, but you might want to click that open. It's about a 300-page document, but it's like an encyclopedia. You wouldn't really have to read the whole thing at one sitting. It's just a good reference source. It talks about how governments are structured and the number of governments per state. So this is really important when you start doing comparisons between states. So for example, if you were doing a project comparing K-12 education funding in the United States, it would be important for you to know that in the state of Hawaii, and this is in this report, there's only one school district. It's a state school district. In the state of Nebraska, a relatively small state, there's 272 school districts. And that includes things like what we call educational service units and the community colleges. But it also includes all the local school districts. So Nebraska has a lot of local school districts for a state of 1.9 million people. And that's important to know because now you can start seeing how the split between state shares and local shares start to operate in a state with 272 school districts. And you can see how funding might operate in versus a state like Hawaii with one school district. So that's a really good document to use just as background. Let's go down here to one that's really interesting, and that's state tax collections. So we want to know about, you know, generally when we do policy analysis, knowing about how much we're paying in taxes state by state is important to know. Well, there's two. These happen to be from the American Fact Finder. The annual survey of state government tax collections by category table and then by detailed table. So let me click on this one that says category table. Okay, so again, 5 broad categories, and you should recognize this. This is the same one you saw in American Fact Finder. So it's 5 broad categories: property taxes, sales and gross receipt taxes, license taxes, income taxes, and other taxes. So here again, you can start comparing state by state how much is collected in taxes. And so, when people do policy analysis, they'll say things like, oh, Nebraska's ranked first in property tax or 15th in property tax or whatever. I mean, you have to start thinking about, okay, what are they really saying there? Are they just talking about raw dollars? Are they talking about per capita? What is it they're talking about? So this is the data that you want to start referencing when you're doing things like that. Let's go back. Here's the detailed table. Now, the detailed table is really interesting because it takes those 5 broad categories and it breaks them down even further. So if we wanted to talk about license taxes, right? You were probably thinking of your driver's license or maybe your fishing license, but there's more. Alcohol beverage licenses. So, a liquor license, basically, for a bar or a restaurant. Amusement license taxes. Corporation license taxes, hunting licenses, motor vehicle operator licenses, public utility licenses, occupation licenses. There are different kinds of income tax, individual and corporate, right? And even in the other taxes category, it starts talking about categories like death and gift taxes, documentary and stock transfer taxes, severance taxes. So here again, you can actually start getting a feel for what these taxes really mean and how much was collected. Okay, so let's go back. Let's go ahead and try to get back to the government's main on this page, and it should take us back to the Census of Governments. Okay, so let's go over here to the Census of Governments. And now here's something you should experiment with, and that's the build a table feature. That, I would go through that, but it's really kind of fun to do it on your own under the Census of Governments. Let's go back to the Census of Governments where we were. And so we've seen all of this stuff before, right? So one last time, let me go back to this. And again, there's all these categories that you can reference. So for the exercise this week, it's going to involve looking at tax rates per capita per state, as you see. So what I've given you right now is enough information to do that. After looking at, the censusreports.org, the ACS, and the Census of Governments. But really, this is just scratching the surface, as you can probably tell. The Census of Governments is really a great source. It's a primary source for talking about particularly revenues and expenditures in states, but also K-12 information and a whole host of other information that is resident on the census page. So I will end this one right here because I think I've probably given you sufficient information to be able to start doing some exploring on your own. Thanks.